You've just set yourself listening to the Critical Cast, a web-based audio program that discusses various elements of popular culture from the 80s to the present day with depth and comedy. Music, film, television, games, countdowns and critiques, reviews and retrospectives. Created by people with diverse taste, for people with diverse taste. This is the Critical Cast with your host, the Critical Android. Digital greetings and a warm analog welcome to you. I am the Critical Android. This is the Critical Cast, and joining me for this episode, I have a very special guest. It's not one of my normal collaborators from my circle of friends who don't do YouTube channels. We actually have a legitimate host of a YouTube channel here for the first time on the Critical Cast. It's Blood, Guts, and Social Commentary.
Hi!
And that's not something I ever thought I'd get the chance to say.
You know the boat I'm in, so I'm just like, yeah, I get to collab with you, like somebody who has a channel, and it's not a byproduct of something else they do.
No, I thank you very much for coming on here, Blood. It's an absolute treat, and just to let some of the viewers here know, because this is definitely not in my normal wheelhouse of things, but that's also why I wanted to do this, to get a chance to talk about something I like that's not normally brought up on the channel. You host a YouTube channel called Blood, Guts, and Social Commentary that takes a look at horror in many of its myriad ways, and doesn't just review like movies. You actually dig into the themes of different films, what they represent, why these things have been relevant for the period of time that they are, and what inspired you to want to make this channel?
I've always kind of had this colossal issue with people going, you're too smart to like that, or this is disposable, or it's all big busted blonde running and falling. And when you really get into the genre and look at it, especially I heavily dealt with this in the gender equality and horror episode, because it infuriates me being a woman. Of people seem to think since I support horror I'm some kind of traitor to my gender, but I wanted to sit there and show it's like, no, there's actually huge subversive social commentary in these films if you just look.
Just to try to give a bit more background, when did you really start getting into horror films? Because I'm assuming, based off your vast knowledge of them, that you've been diving into this genre for quite some time.
Yes and no. I had a somewhat restrictive household when it came to entertainment.
Ah, that'll do it.
Yeah, I absolutely blame my mother for it, because my two earliest memories with horror is her saying Texas Chainsaw Massacre scared the daylights out of her, and because we walked past at a video store, Blockbuster on a VHS, to give you an idea of time frame. And we were flipping through channels one day, and all I saw was a glove with knives on it, just curling over a pipe, and she freaked and turned it off, and she's like, no, it's too scary. And I'm like, and later finding out, it's like, okay, Leatherface and Freddy became two of my favorite things, and I kind of trace it back to that. So about 13, so doing math really quick, because I'm 29, so 16 years ago is about how long I've been watching, because then I could I had my own job, so I could start running movies myself.
Given that span of time, though, the horror industry in terms of distribution of films, the making of films, the access to them has changed drastically. So what is it about the industry today that you like and dislike, as opposed to what horror was like when you were younger and we had a completely different model of filmmaking?
Definitely the aspects of distribution they've improved, but that is a double-edged sword. We've always had an oversaturation with horror. Even when we're not technically in a horror boom, you will always find horror titles. There's just no two ways about it, because barriers to entry, I don't want to say are low for horror, but it's one of the genres that's a little easier to mimic. And since it tends to get viewed as more base, people feel like they can pull it off more, so they have that confidence and are willing to try a horror film. So the distribution versus like the VHS, and you had to have a physical copy era, we're now seeing this saturation with digital means like Hulu, Amazon Prime, Netflix, and just overall, some people are putting their own stuff up on YouTube. going, yeah, I don't intend to make money back off of this, but I want to put it out there. The movie Blank was given up to torrent sites by the director with full permission to download it. It's kind of on the edge of if that's a horror movie or not, but it was a really good film either way. So we're getting this influx in people being able to put what they're doing out there, which is fantastic. And distribution used to be an incredibly hard thing.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
Exactly. And if you want to compare it to music, it was like trying to sell it out of the back of a trunk at a show in a state and hope somebody with influence picked it up and got you some buzz in that area. Whereas now, I'd love to say the cream rises to the top. Unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't. But we do have this influx in movies that are just not so great. And it's great people are putting them out there, but it does kind of lend to the disposability of the genre. So while it's undervaluing it with how much you can stream it, it's also giving access to these things that we wouldn't have seen before.
Yeah, for those who aren't very familiar with the film industry, back when we didn't have as many studios as we do, who even work on an independent level, if you want to get a movie made, it had to be picked up by one of the major studios. And you had some, like the Weinstein Company and Miramax, they were pretty big on pushing out some of those independent films. And today, you don't have to go through them. You could feasibly finance a movie, either through independent means or through some backers, however you want to go about it. Maybe get a little bit of studio input too, and then put it out on one of either a major company's smaller labels, or distribute it yourself through online platforms. And like when you say there's a glut of content that can come out of there, that problem is when you do have the very poorly made films from people who just think that they know what they're doing, and sadly don't. It pushes some of that stuff out there and can swallow up a lot of the other stronger releases that are trying to make it on that platform as well at the same time, but have more love, care, and craft put into it.
And this is the exact same thing we see with the Sphere. Like, I'm not sure how it is in podcast community, but we see that in YouTube a lot of sometimes the flashier product gets more attention, even though it's not necessarily as fact-based or well-made.
Right.
Because I've seen, I'm not going to call anybody, I've seen some major YouTubers with some serious factual errors in their stuff to the point where they're mispronouncing the main character's name. And like, I have no issue with people having scripts written for them. Not a problem at all. I understand, you get big enough, you need it. But if you've clearly never watched the movie, it's very inauthentic to be talking about it.
Yeah, that, and even if somebody is writing the script for you, if you come across a word that you don't know how to pronounce, it really doesn't take that much effort to go and do a little bit of research yourself and make sure you're saying it right.
Exactly. I apologize all the time for butchering other languages, because if I stumble across an English word I don't not 100% on, I use a text-to-speech. It's very quick, very easy. You can Google it super fast.
And unfortunately, still, like you say, there's channels that, mirroring what we're saying about horror, just don't do it quite right, and you don't want to stifle creative freedom, because that's a very important thing and one of the great parts about how the medium is expanded. But at the same time, you need to try to find that balance between doing what you want to do and doing something that will possibly appeal to a larger audience that you're trying to distribute it to.
Oh, absolutely. When I was in college, I had a professor flat out tell me, and she wasn't being mean, she wasn't being rude. She said, like, you will never sell. There's no market for what you want to do. And I'm like, I understand that. It was like, I get that there's, like, I was not getting into a market, and this is not about the channel or anything like that. And I appreciated her trying to prepare me. I just was already aware.
Well, speaking of, like, the trends and whatnot of that in that scope, what do you see in horror films as of late that have been a positive influence on the industry, and what do you really want to see kind of fade back into the abyss from whence it came?
Well, I know what you want to fade into the abyss. I actually kind of like zombies.
What? Like, there's too many zombies, man. They're everywhere.
I will give you. It's definitely oversaturated, but since I don't have cable, it's like I'm not seeing it. I have to wait for Walking Dead to come on Netflix. I'm actually super behind on Walking Dead 2 because I read the comics, which is first problem. And
there you go. That'll do it.
when it got announced, I said, I'm like, Michonne and the Governor are my 2 lines. If they mess them up, I'm out. And they kind of did Michonne right, but they kind of screwed up the Governor. And I'm like, no, what? It's like, I don't know what to do with this here. So I took several years off. But now I have research watchers and YouTubers. So I'm just like, hey, I don't know if you saw it yesterday. I said I was watching Belko Experiment. And I'm just like, this is the first movie, or the second movie since I've launched the channel that I've not taken production notes on while watching.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, just because I'm 24/7 at it, but it's always there. There's always an angle. There's always something. But trends, I dislike. I'm trying to figure out how to say this without specifically calling out a specific movie. There are filmmakers out there that super want to break the mold, and I'm fully supportive of that. I have given terrible movies my money when I could go to theaters, and even now that I can't, bought them on DVD just so I could watch them, just because they had an original plot. I will give any of that my money. No problem. But there are some that go a little too far and do something so out of the box that it fails miserably. I'll just say it. Muck tried to open in the middle of the franchise, and it just didn't work. It looked incoherent. It looked disjointed. It made no sense.
Even in saying that and criticizing it, I'm assuming that there was still potential there that was untapped?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was resting on the idea of scantily clad girls running around from this monster, but since we had no backstory, it just didn't work. It just fell flat. And because I love Cade Hodder because he pairs with STC and I like him as an actor, but it's just one of those things. It's like we had no idea what was going on with the story, so it was kind of hard to even get into it. I couldn't make heads or tails of what was going on, and normally I can pick up on stuff like that.
But in a more positive sense then, what do you see that really does inspire you to keep digging through films as they come out?
It is the diamond in the rough, and I mean, there is maybe 2 or 3 movies I would claim are completely unwatchable. I find something positive in everything. And that's specifically why I also don't review, because I just would sit there and gush over everything. I'm just like, you like everything. Why are you? And it's like, not necessarily I like everything. I just see redeeming value. Everybody has their voice. Everybody has the input. YouTube and the horror community are also related in this aspect of diversity is the draw. Of you can have several people essentially telling the same story, but there's always this different bend and this different interpretation. I literally just cut a video yesterday about Phantom of the Opera's ties to horror. This back and forth we've seen between the grandiose, big theatrical productions and how gritty and gory that story can be.
That's a really good way of looking at that, too. And considering the popularity of it, kind of horror musical, they're normally not phrases that you hear put together, but yeah, Phantom really does own up to that in every kind of sense of that hybrid genre.
Yeah, I set out to do a horror musical episode, and that was the overwhelming opinion I've always gotten, is the 2 things don't go together. And I just started preliminary research and realized there was way more to it. So I'm just like, okay, we're going to do a 2-parter, one outlining history and one going into more modern examples.
Well, speaking of hybrid genres, how's that for a fucking segue? That's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you onto the show today, because we are going to be discussing a hybrid genre of horror, specifically the comedy horror or horror comedy, depending on which one takes precedent at the time, and some of the noteworthy of that. You know, I know some people, and I think I'll put it this way, I know more people who hate horror comedy than absolutely adore it, while a majority of people, I think, are in that middle ground of, yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
I have at least one friend who absolutely refuses to watch anything that throws comedy into his horror, because he likes the horror straight up. That's how it's supposed to be. When I watch a horror movie, I'm not supposed to be laughing. I want to watch the horror movie. Mm-hmm. And I try to toss, well, what about, Freddy? Hey, Krueger's got that kind of comedy backbone going to him with the sadism and everything and the one-liners. It's like, I'll give him a pass. Oh, right, well, now you're just contradicting yourself. Now you're just picking and choosing.
To be fair, it was easier to give him a pass towards the beginning of the franchise instead of towards the end of it, or the last original incarnation of it for the reboot happened, especially when you got to something like Freddy's Nightmare, which was just like, this is a little too cheesy.
At least
it's still loved, don't get me wrong, but
at least I would argue that a new Nightmare completely redeemed that entire franchise.
Exactly, but then you have horror fans that just will not accept New Nightmare for some weird reason.
Well, there's a different conversation for a different time. But for now, when we were discussing leading up to this, about this genre, it's a really, really fascinating one because it's been around for a lot longer than I think people give it credit for. Because they kind of forget, even before the 70s, 80s B-movie phase, you even had like older movies that technically would classify as horror, like even Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein or The Werewolf. And
Jesse James Meets Frankenstein's Daughter.
It's old, but it's taking those elements of horror and putting it in with the comedy. But that's a very different kind of horror comedy than, say, in the last couple of years we've had a few. There was Krampus, the Christmas movie.
Mm-hmm.
Get Out falls into the horror comedy genre, which was actually probably the most recent one that could possibly be discussed at this point in time.
Yeah, exactly. I know Ginger Snaps had a problem categorizing when they were going to festivals because they pointed out we ride this really weird line between horror and insanely dark comedy.
Really depending on how much emphasis they want to put on one label or the other. I divvy it up into 3 different kind of categories when it comes to horror films, and those are the categories that we'll be talking about today. You have the movies that are just unintentionally hysterical because of how bad of a horror film it is. Even in then, there's a subgenre of people who really want to make their movie bad to begin with because that was the intent.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the others who they weren't trying to make the movie funny. They actually were trying to make a legitimately good film, but because of either lack of talent or lack of a budget, it just turned out really, really bad.
The Ed Wood demographic, if you will.
Yes, that's a perfect example. Poor Ed. He tried so hard.
I always have this weird love for Ed just because of that, and I met Conrad Brooks because he's quasi-local, and he's a great guy, very sweet man. He will sell you anything that's not nailed down, though. You can tell he was in with Ed Wood. Like,
gotta get the money from someplace.
Yeah, because he was, when I met him, he was at a booth with Ted Mooring, I believe is how you pronounce his name. Did like Invasion of the Reptoids, Bloodbath in the House of Knives, and he was like promoting him. So I'm like, at least you're using it to get, more independence out there. That you're using your weird four-walling showmanship ability for good.
You also have comedy horror that's not really trying to scare you by any means. It's got some elements there, but it's mostly focused on using some of the thematic parts of it to frame the film, and it's pushing the comedy element to it. And then finally, you have the ones that get that perfect mix of it. Like, they really do have some legitimately good scares, or the themes of the film truly do fit the horror convention, but they either subvert it a bit with comedic interactions, or maybe even the actors lend themselves from a comedy background to making the interactions funny and the dialogue humorous. But it doesn't sacrifice the fact that, you're still watching a horror movie, and the elements of that are serious in itself. When we went through these, we broke them into there, and we each have a movie from those subsets that we're going to be talking about today. And Blood, since you're the guest, why don't you pick the subset and let us know what film you've got?
I guess we'll do So Bad It's Funny and just get that over with, because you already know what I picked.
Yes.
I picked the film The Item. It revolves around... I'm trying to explain the monster without using the word mucus, which is just not going to happen. It's weird because the cover has this almost crate, and you see this eye kind of through the crate, and it looks like a reptilian being. But what it actually is this weird, like, I guess I'd compare him to Slimer from Ghostbusters, except for he just kind of trots around. And he tells people things, but they never really tell you what he's telling people. And he basically encourages them to commit suicide, is his method of killing people.
Yeah, that kind of sums it up.
There's a sex scene at one point for no reason anybody can deduce. And when I say sex scene, I'm not talking about between two people. I mean between the girl and the slime thing.
Yeah, nor are you talking like the whole Dan Aykroyd in Ghostbusters getting a blowjob from a ghost off camera. This is interesting to watch. You know, it's almost kind of like if they took actual porn and that whole Team America World Police movie and slapped it together.
Yeah, puppet porn was a legit thing even before Team America, believe it or not.
I'd heard a little bit about this movie, but mostly just from a couple of like lists that ran through obscure bad movies. How did you come across this thing?
Upcominghorrormovies.com, I've been a board member on there for years, and the webmaster, whose name is Frightmaster, he's the owner of the website and does all the reviews and all that. It's completely independent, which is why I gravitate there. I'm not shamelessly promoting, they don't pay me, but...
Well, I'll put a link in the description here.
He did jokingly mention the movie The Item, and kept saying it was so bad, and I'm one of those people, the second you tell me this is the worst movie ever made, that's all I'm going to want to go do and watch. I'm like, no, I take that as a challenge. I ran at it, and yeah, it's pretty bad.
I have a hard time. I only literally watched this about 7 hours ago, and my god, I find it strange that the guy who directed this and also starred in it went on to work on Yo Gabba Gabba, I think it was.
Yo Gabba Gabba is done by the Aquabats, though, so nothing really confused me with that. I'm like, the Aquabats were just a weird band to begin with. So having them pull in weird B-Z-list celebrities makes sense.
Ah, man, the plot of this thing. I guess the basic plot would be you get a bunch of guys who are of disreputable morality.
Yeah.
And they're supposed to hold on to a box that's given to them by an outcast member of, looks like the Buggles. Somehow Trevor Horn and Jeffrey Downs from the Buggles had a breakup, and one of them got a monster in a box. And brings it to these people to hold for somebody else to pick up and sell. It's not really given a lot of backstory here.
Yeah.
And then they decide to dick around and see what's in the box. And they probably shouldn't have done that, because whenever you open a box, it doesn't even have to be labeled Pandora. You open the box, bad things happen.
Exactly. Yeah, that's just a horror movie trope. I took a ceramics class in college, and my professor said never open a door that you don't know what's on the other side of. Because in that room, he's like, well, if you open a kiln and it's not done yet, you will melt your face off. So it's important horror logic, too, of don't open the thing unless you know.
We get introduced to, I mean, you partially described him as Slimer. You know, I don't want to say it because the appearance of the thing is reason enough to watch the film.
Now I'm thinking about like a cross between Slimer and Jabba the Hutt, maybe?
Kinda?
Yeah.
Maybe a bit more emphasis on Jabba in terms of the coloration and stuff.
Yeah.
But I also couldn't tell whether or not this movie was trying to be really, really bad, because the thing that really tipped me off on that was when there's a chase sequence where these irreputable people are trying to chase down a bunch of cross-dressers, possibly transvestites. They don't really give us the background, and they're just running after them. But instead of actually running, it looks like they're riding segways from the waist up. I don't know what happened, if they just scrolled the backgrounds behind them or something, but it looks awful. And it's hysterical seeing it, which leads to gunfights where I swear to you, each gun is able to chamber about 300 bullets before the clips run out. It's insane. And obviously at that point in time it has to be deliberate, because if it shoots like, okay, let's say a gun has 8 shots in it. If it shoots 10, 11, all right, you're pushing realism, but okay, it's suspension of disbelief. When it gets over like 50, you know this was deliberate.
Well, that's the thing. I've seen this a lot with smaller horror makers, where they get so sick and tired of the tropes and so sick and tired of everybody explaining everything to them, they go too far the other way, or think, oh, this director got away with this, like you said, where they'll have somebody shoot 10 or 15 bullets, and we see that all the time in action movies, and think, oh, I can get away with that too, and just don't realize there's kind of a finite number of how much you can get away with it. So sometimes it is just a kind of miscommunication about filmmaking, because I've seen movies do stuff like that actually were 100% meant to be serious. Where, you know, somebody's running and it's clear, for some weird reason, I've seen this a bunch of times with, you know, storage units, how they have those long hallways with the doors on either side that roll up.
Yes.
I've seen those so many times where people have just clearly been running back and forth in one of those. And my guess is if you know somebody with a storage unit, you just kind of piggyback on, and most people aren't there all the time, so you can shoot pretty easily, would be the logic in it, I guess, but it's hard to cut it to make it look legitimate to the setting you're in.
Right, and that's the problem, and why when it comes to low-budget films, you have to give them a degree of leeway here. Because when you're working on a fixed budget, you're trying to do what you can with what you have. And if creativity is flowing freely, sometimes you can do some wonderful things with that, but still, you're limited by your tools.
Exactly, and sometimes it's something, like people will look at Star Wars and be like, Lucas was working with a limited budget, I can do that too. It's like, yes, but Lucas was working with a limited budget and had a lot of creative problem solving.
Right.
Creative problem solving is a big thing when it comes to any form of art.
Yeah, and necessity being the mother of invention with things like that. If you put yourself into that situation, you can sometimes come up with some really ingenious ideas, but the onus is going to be on you to be able to do that. If that's not your thing, then either bring somebody on board who can do that, or find another means of channeling your creativity, rather than trying to make something out of nothing. Sometimes you just can't do it.
I let technical perfection go if I'm looking at something with a very interesting idea, but if you're giving me the same thing that I've seen 20,000 times before, I'm going to expect a little bit more quality, just because what else is the point of me watching it? If you're not deviating from the story everybody's told before, then I'm going to expect a higher quality production.
Well, I think the item at least deviates from previous stories by featuring what I think was about a 6-minute Chinese food eating scene that had no relevance to anything.
I mean, it's like the restaurant scene in Birdemic. Maybe they took inspiration from that. Where, one has totally clean audio, the other one has way too loud background noises on loop.
It does make for... It's one of those things where you can easily fast forward it. You're not missing anything. The fact that it's there is what makes it so comical. By no stretch of the imagination is that decent filmmaking to include this, but it's there.
Every time I see something like that, all I can think about is the movie Cannibal the Musical, which if you haven't seen it and you want to watch it, and then watch it again with commentary, because the commentary is totally worth it. Because Trey Parker and Matt Stone are just doing shots the entire time and getting progressively more drunk. And they actually knock over the mic at one point and don't record for like 20 minutes and like, oh yeah, we kind of forgot to fix it. But one of them, I can't remember which one wrote it, I want to say it was Trey, said he kept mentioning this guy had bought fudge. And he mentioned it like 3 or 4 times in the movie. He's like, hey, I'm going to buy this fudge. Hey, remember that fudge I have? Just so they could lead up to him offering fudge later when they're starving. And he's like, if I had been a better writer, I would have realized I don't need to mention it 5 times. This guy has fudge to remind you he has fudge that he can offer when they're starving. And I think some writers do that of maybe that scene had significance beforehand and they took out whatever reference would have made it significant. Or they just felt they didn't need to explain it, and then people would just get it. And sometimes when you're on top of something and working on it, and it is your baby and it is your passion, it's very hard to think of, oh, I have to explain this because people don't know me, or they don't know the story behind this thing.
There is a lot of unknown put into this that is not explained, and it kind of leaves you wondering, why did this person do that? Why is he so angry? Why did he feel the need to suddenly do this to the other person? Like, you'll be asking yourself a lot of these questions as the film goes along. It is that riddle in the enigma in the box that people speak of. That's the item. And I don't want to say anything negative, taking a page from your book and not wanting to dissuade people from viewing it. I can't necessarily say that I fully recommend spending your time doing this. It would be something entertaining to watch with a group of people if you enjoy watching bad movies with other people. That is a perfect way to watch this.
That's exactly how I watched it. I picked it up, showed it to my husband because we were just dating at the time, and said, I want to watch this because it's terrible. And he's like, okay.
And you guys successfully got married after this, despite the film.
No, he's done that to me too because he loves kung fu movies.
Oh, okay. Well, that's perfect too. Golden Harvest movies. Perfect example of a wonderful production company that just goes balls to the walls with zaniness when they want to.
Yeah, that is one of his favorite distributors. He's actually still trying to get all of the Wu-Tang Clan kind of ninja things that they were releasing. It was that and Ninja Theater. They're like the two big ones he's been seeking out.
More power to him. I've got a friend myself who I recorded a podcast with, who a huge fan of them, and he's the kind of guy who he has such a wonderful background and knowledge of film, from the French New Wave, some of the more artsy German films that were made back in the 70s and 80s. Very much dedicated to that, and you wouldn't think he would have this penchant for bad kung fu movies. But he does. He loves them.
There was a study that I'm a little suspect of because I couldn't find their raw data, which is probably behind a paywall somewhere. And it essentially implied smarter people like bad movies because they can kind of see the jokes in it more than other people can. Which I'm like, that title's clickbaity and kind of suspect. But I tend to see that with big cinemaphiles. People that are really well educated just want to like watch this terrible thing and laugh. Because I guess it would probably be the way most people that aren't super into film would view a comedy. It's less using your brain. It's just a kind of unwindy enjoyment thing instead of sitting there and trying to pay attention to every single nuance of this fantastic film that you would feel guilty about not paying attention to every single nuance of.
When you know about how film is made, or you're more familiar with the conventions of writing and directing, and you see some of the things that they go out of their way to do here, or seemingly don't go out of their way to do, it does add an awful lot to the enjoyment of it, in the sense of asking those questions to yourself about what were they thinking? Because you know what they were supposed to be thinking. You have an idea in your mind of how a film is supposed to play out. Why didn't they do that? Why does it look like the actors are not actually running and are just on roller skates in a chase sequence?
Yeah, I took one film class in college and asked my film professor about the Italian giallos, where they would have the cast speak English. They typically shot in America, even though it was an Italian production. But then they would do audio replacement over all of it. And it's like, why? There's one movie I got an explanation on, and that was it. And I didn't get it from him, I got it from just looking around, because they had to shoot it, I believe it was they had to shoot during the day due to child labor laws, and had to cover the house in a tent to make it look dark, so they had these massive fans going so people didn't suffocate.
Well, that makes sense from that perspective.
Yeah, the fans killed the audio, so I'm like, oh, the audio is nasty because they had to drown out the fan sound and trying to edit that out.
I don't see where they would have had to do anything like that with the item, but man, what a movie. What a movie.
Yeah, that was just running through the genre, and it's always bothered me. I gotta search it out at some point and do an episode on it of like, this is why, because I'm curious too.
Do you have any closing thoughts on this film?
If you have friends that like to do the Mystery Science Theater 3000 treatment of films, have at this one. You're probably not going to miss too much by cracking jokes.
No, you definitely won't. And let's hope that if the Netflix revival of MST3K gets another season, we'd love to see them pick up this one.
Yeah, no, that would be fun.
On my So Bad, It's Good. I went with Jaws 3, otherwise known as Jaws 3D, if you saw it in theaters when they actually had the 3D effects going on. Because the home media release does, I don't want to say has the benefit of the 3D, because I wouldn't call it a benefit in this movie. The original Jaws, everybody should know, and if you don't, it's still worth watching to this day because of how well it treats the horror genre. Spielberg, despite the fact that you don't associate Spielberg with horror, he knows how to do it so well. The pacing, the holding off on the reveal of the shark, the way that he builds up the characters and you form the attachment to them, the pacing of when the attacks happen, followed by the moments of levity to build up that tension again. It's a master course in horror film. Jaws 2 is better than it probably should have ever been, considering it's a sequel to a movie that needed no sequel whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they even got John Williams to score the second one is a fucking miracle. I don't know how they got him to do that, but he did. 3 goes and takes all that out the window, and it becomes, to its credit, This is almost like Jurassic Park trying to outdo Jurassic Park years before Jurassic Park was Jurassic Park.
Yeah, there was that definitely one-upsmanship. You tend to see that with the third film in the horror genre as well. It tends to be the way of it.
Yeah, they have to try to do something to shake it up. If the second sequel is always supposed to be bigger and better, the third one either has to change direction drastically. Halloween 3 is a perfect example of where they shifted gears and completely changed the story up. Was, depending on who you talk to, that was or wasn't a good idea.
I've seen a resurgence in love on that one. I think a lot of people have started coming around to it and getting it, of why that one happened.
Yeah, at the time it was confusing, and if we do any episode about sequels, that one is definitely worth discussing for why it did what it did.
Yeah, it felt like April Fool's Day to a lot of people, where it was a big middle finger to the fans. Whereas when you get out of that anger and that immediate response, you realize, like, oh yeah, this actually wasn't bad.
And Jaws 3D was a big middle finger to Roy Scheider, who has nothing to do with this movie, and now focuses on his kid, played by Dennis Quaid, who has to fight a great white shark in a theme park. Yeah! Because that's what we wanted out of our Jaws movies. SeaWorld.
I mean, you can say this one inspired Piranha 3 Double D, which also had elements that took place in a water park and 3D features.
It probably did. Surprisingly, this movie was successful when it came out. It shouldn't have been. It really should not have been, for why it was, at least. Because when you go to see Jaws, especially compared it to the previous ones, you should not be anticipating an unintentionally funny film, but that's what we got. And the reason why it becomes that has a lot to do with the fact that they are trying to recapture the success of the original, and they know they can't do it. They've already done it. Now they don't even have, like, their big actor. They don't have Brody. They have his son. So it's like, okay, well, we'll kind of make him like his father, and we'll do that. And then we don't have Quinn, so we'll kind of get somebody else to be Quinn, except he'll be British this time, because why the fuck not? And we'll give him a super British name, like Fitzroyce, because that works perfect. And we should have a girl in there, and we need bathing suits, and we need a shark, and we need Louis Gossett Jr., so let's get him in there too.
And ham-fisted love story. Always ham-fisted love story.
Oh, has to be. And we also need dolphins. We need a shit ton of dolphins in this movie. People fucking love dolphins.
Of course they do. Most people also like tuna.
So they get all that into one net. Make your own joke. That's what they throw at us. All this stuff in Jaws 3D, coupled with the worst 3D effects you will ever see in your life. Like, within the first 5 minutes of the movie, we're just underwater, and we're seeing from, like, the shark's point of view, and it goes and it eats a fish, and then you see this dead fish head just floating at the screen. It's not doing anything, it's just floating there, and it looks fucking awful. It's the worst 3D, because it's not even 3D anymore. It can't be, from the way that it's projected. But even when you look at it, it's like, when they were when people saw this in theaters, did they either had to shit their pants, or they would have just been groaning, because this looks awful.
I'm listing off terrible 3D movies in my head right now. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty bad, don't get me wrong.
and the worst one, and this is the one that gets probably the most play online if you're looking up clips of Jaws 3D, comes near the very end of the film, where this technological underwater SeaWorld that they've built has come under threat from a shark who apparently is vindictive because its child died within the confines of the park, and the mother shark, who for some reason is able to express and carry emotion, shark can't fucking do that, they have no care for their young, is decided that it needs to wreak havoc and revenge on the park, and it goes and it busts up some tubes that are carrying people underwater so they can, like, view the aquarium from underneath the aquarium. And it's busting up pipes, so you got people who are like, oh, we're all gonna drown, it's filled with water, shield the doors, lock the people in with the water, because that makes fucking sense. And here comes the shark, and it's swimming at the control room, and it's coming at the window, and it's going like maybe, I don't know, 2 inches an hour, and it's just like coming at them, and it's like, oh, what are we gonna do? And they're all panicking, and the shark's in 3D, because it looks bad anyway, and 3D just makes it worse. Coming at you, and it busts the glass. And that's even worse. Like, you didn't think the special effects could get any worse than that. It got worse, because the glass doesn't even look like fucking glass. And now everything's coming at you, and the fake water spilling in, and Louis Gossett Jr. is like shitting his pants because he's supposed to be owning and running this place, and like all his money's going down the tubes along with his hopes and dreams. And Dennis Quaid is just like, I need to have a career after this, I need to get the fuck out of here. So he like grabs somebody and just runs, and it is the worst shit you'll ever see in a Jaws film, and it is amazing.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree on the it's amazing front, because I'm actually coming at this from a fresher viewpoint than most people, because my deep, dark, secret confession, I didn't see any of the Jaws movies until last year.
Oh, wow.
I never saw them on cable, and I always try and avoid films that I know an animal's going to get killed, because I really hate that. I'm trying to get better, so I decided to start with Jaws.
Well, fortunately, the sharks never really looked that great, so...
Well, it's funny you mentioned in the first one that the reveal was so subtle and short and quick. From my understanding, that was actually a choice by the editor, because the freaking shark kept breaking, and Spielberg was so attached and like, I want to show this shark that we spent all this money on and fixing it, and that and the other, and it's like, no. The more we show the shark, the less believable it will look. So do nice quick reveal, and we get away with how crappy our shark looks.
Sometimes the meddling in things like that, when another person steps in and offers that kind of, hey, maybe we should do it this way, it's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it is, but not always. And this is one of those ones where it turned out to be an okay thing.
Because we're talking about people getting away with things, in my head, I'm just like, and Spielberg, in that total scene change in Jurassic Park, is like, oh, flatland, cliff. It's like, what? Where did the cliff come from?
I'm surprised more people don't pick up on that.
The same thing happened in Apocalypto. Like, all of a sudden, the water changed directions, and there's waterfall, and I'm like, how did, what?
Because that's the way that Mel saw it. Not gonna question him. It was an interesting movie. I mean,
blowing the entire ending to the movie in the middle of the movie.
Hey, yeah. You know, it wasn't going to be Braveheart, okay? Give Mel some slack, man.
Never giving Mel slack. We're talking about Brooks, yes. Gibson, no.
Different discussion for a different time, damn it.
Brooks has earned it, damn it.
I love Mel Brooks, but I am also a huge goddamn fan of the Lethal Weapon movies, and will defend all 4 of them to the death, as well as every other movie where Mel Gibson is looking for revenge or has a dead wife, which is fucking all of them. I very much enjoy them.
So are you also a big Charles Bronson fan? Because
No.
that's essentially all he does.
But Mel's got that humor, and if you catch him early enough, he's also got that Aussie accent too, which is just awesome.
Your Mel is great. I will totally give you that. Apocalypto Mel was dog shit on a stick.
This coming from the person who didn't want to discourage people from watching fucking movies, and you're shitting all over Apocalypto.
I'm sorry that it's not unwatchable. It's not a terrible movie, but if you know how to listen to dialogue, you will know the entire ending in the middle.
Oh, all right. Well, you know what? Okay, fine. Mel Gibson still. Yeah, there's so much I want to say right now, and we're just keeping further and further away from the point of Jaws 3D.
Fine, we'll cut it into another episode just about Mel Gibson.
I'll need a Mel Gibson episode, because I will say it's the most amazing movie ever, because it is the most patriotic yet historically inaccurate movie ever made, The Patriot, starring Mel Gibson, where he single-handedly wins the Revolutionary War. Goddamn love that movie.
Now, if you want to talk historical inaccuracies, I live near Gettysburg. The reenactors have a lot to say about the movie Gettysburg, because most of them were in it.
I wonder if they had the same comments on Gods and Generals, the follow-up that nobody saw.
Yeah, no, my father loved Gods and Generals, couldn't stand Gettysburg.
Wow. That's normally not the opinion that you generally hear on that.
Well, wasn't it Gods and Generals was written by his son?
Yes, because the original author passed away, and his son had picked up the slack.
Yeah, Gettysburg obviously has big events, and we went one day, and my father bought his copy of Gods and Generals because the son was there, and he asked him to sign it, and apparently he was the only one that knew that day that the son had written Gods and Generals. It's like, really? Out of everybody here, you were the only one that picked that up? That's terrifying.
Wow. I'm not even a Civil War buff, and I know that.
Yeah, it was like, I'm not either. I've just been around them my entire life.
Jeez. Jaws 3D has nothing to do with the Civil War, as it turns out. As a matter of fact, it probably promotes more of racial tolerance because you have a black business owner who's very successful for himself. And, that's awesome, because we needed that in the 80s.
Yeah, and they had that pinnacle moment when pretty much every Jaws movie or any waterfront town horror movie where they can't close down the town because we have tourists coming. Every single waterfront horror movie.
And in Jaws 3D, they're not going to close down that amusement park because it's the big opening. Louis Gossett Jr. has his Academy Award from Officer and a Gentleman the year before, and you know damn well if he won the Academy Award, he's going to make every appearance in this movie count. And so he is just like ham-fistedly running this park, and he ain't going to let a shark do. He's not going to let a shark do it. He's got a fucking Oscar. He's not going to let the shark ruin his day at this point in time.
Absolutely. He's just like, nope. We got people coming. I've got money to make. Even when everything's going transparently wrong, nope, I've got money to make.
Yeah. And the best part about this film, and I'm going to ruin it for everybody for the ending, but it's worth talking about just because of how amazing this is. We see, remember that British guy that I mentioned before with the obviously British name? Well, he gets obviously eaten by a shark because they focus on that for about a good 2 minutes. So if you're a fan of that kind of vor fetish shit, people getting eaten, this is right up your alley because you get to watch this shark chomp down on this guy for an extended period of time. And despite the fact that he's been eating him and just going to town, when the shark is attacking that command center and busts through the glass, Dennis Quaid looks inside the shark's mouth like he's a fucking dentist. There's half of the guy that the shark supposedly ate, and his hand is just conveniently sticking all the way fucking out with a grenade in his hand. Because, by the way, this guy had underwater grenades earlier in the movie. And he's still got one conveniently in his hand. And Dennis Quaid's just, oh, look, I can just take this fucking coat hanger here, and it's trying to open the car door that's been locked. Just gonna pull the pin on that grenade and blow up the shark. And you know what? It fucking works. This movie is batshit crazy.
And that scene clearly inspired the iconic scene in Sharknado, where we have the chainsaw going through to save, what was it, Tara Reid?
Or sadly, the main guy? I think it was Tara Reid. I don't even want to think about it anymore.
Okay, we'll not bring up a cinematic masterpiece like Sharknado anymore.
Compared to Jaws 3D, I mean, at least Sharknado was intentionally trying to be awful.
Yeah.
But that's why I like Jaws 3D so much more. It's because it wasn't trying to be bad. They were trying to make a legitimately good sequel to Jaws, and this is the best they could do.
I went in with that expectation because when I was marathoning through all the Jaws films, I remembered a joke they made on Psych about Jaws 3D. And I was just like, oh yeah, that was really terrible because he was afraid of the water, and his father's entire issue wasn't that he was afraid of the water because of Jaws and his stats are off. It was the fact that it was Jaws 3D.
I remember that.
Yeah, he took issue with it. Oh, poor Corbin Burnson. He deserves so much better on that show.
Well, one of my favorite Corbin Burnson lines is when they're doing one of the typical flashback sequences, and Sean and Gus are looking over. I think it's a video game console or computer, and his dad, played by Corbin, comes over. It's like, oh, computers, they're not going to be important. They're just a fad, like Madonna and L.A. Law, which if you. They're making Corbin Burnson piss over his entire career.
Pretty much.
God damn it, I love Psych.
So it is a fantastic show.
Here's a plug that's not being paid for. Psych movie coming out this Christmas on USA. Go check it out.
Yay!
Reunion movie. We're all going to be happy.
I was actually unaware of that.
Oh yeah, this December. They are making an official reunion movie, and it's taking place over, I guess, Christmas.
Yeah, and people can say what they want about Fuller House, but I'm pretty sure they started that trend, so...
Take what we can get, especially when it's something like Psych that was amazing. Well, this doesn't tie into Psych in any way, shape, or form. I guess it kind of does, because Psych had its moments of horror with the Mr. Ying, and it had that kind of horror, creepy vibe.
They had the Hitchcock episode.
Oh, they did too, didn't they? And they had a Twin Peaks episode too, Dual Spires.
Yep, there you go.
Yeah. And that expertly crafted.
Total tie-in.
Yes, it does. Ties in, and that brings us to comedy horror with a bit more emphasis on the comedy. Blood, what you got for that one?